I remember the day it all stopped working, not as a single event, but as a series of small failures that cascaded into silence. I was in the primary control room at the East Sector water treatment plant, watching numbers scroll across a screen that measured particulate counts per million. My job was data, understanding the flow and purity of water for 2 million people. The first alarm was an atmospheric sensor on the roof, a screaming alert about airborne contaminants that we all dismissed as a malfunction. Then the city power grid flickered, a deep brownout that made the lights dip and the backup generators kick on with a shudder. My screen filled with red warnings from pump stations across the city as their pressure sensors went offline one by one. It was the silence I remember most, the moment the constant low vibration of the massive purification turbines beneath my feet simply ceased. Outside the reinforced windows, the sky had turned a strange, hazy orange, and a fine red powder was beginning to settle on every surface like a terrible rust. That was the day the world's infrastructure bled out, and I learned that everything we built was just a fragile system of pipes and wires waiting for the right pressure to break. Now that red dust is a part of the world, and Maya's cough is the only alarm that matters. It's a dry, rasping sound that cuts through the damp air of our hovel in Sector 9. I stood in the mud, clutching the scavenged air filter, its plastic casing cool against my palm. I had traded 3 days of our food rations for it, a transaction that felt both necessary and insane. Maya sat on a rusted metal crate near our shelter, her small face pale in the perpetual twilight cast by Aethelgard's glowing wall. The wall was always there, a sheer cliff of clean white composite material rising 100 meters into the sky, separating our squalor from their sterile paradise. Its brilliant spotlights cut through the polluted haze, a constant promise of a world with clean air and clean water, a world where little girls didn't get sick just from breathing. The filter was a temporary patch, a flimsy piece of mesh and charcoal that wouldn't last a week, and looking from it to the impossible perfection of that wall, a cold certainty settled in my gut. I had to get her over it. The medicine required a different kind of trade. I found the old V in his usual spot in the Black Market Alley, a narrow passage between shacks where the stench of unwashed bodies and chemical runoff was thick enough to taste. He sat on a pile of scavenged electronics, his face a roadmap of cynicism and grime. I laid out 2 salvaged power cells on his greasy tarp. He picked one up, tested its weight in his hand, and grunted. "The antibiotics?" I told him. "The broad-spectrum ones." He gestured with his chin towards Aethelgard, its light filtering down even here. "Still staring at that wall, Ro? Thinking it'll save you?" "It'll save her," I said, my voice flat. He let out a dry chuckle and pushed a small foil-wrapped packet towards me. "You'd sell your soul to climb that wall. Just make sure you know what you're buying on the other side." I pocketed the medicine without a word. I already knew what I was buying. I was buying Maya's next breath. Back in our shelter, the air was heavy with the smell of damp earth. While Maya slept, her breathing eased by the first dose. I worked in secret. Years ago, my crew was hired by a Gene-Sys subcontractor to decommission one of their first-generation mobile testing units. It was a scrap job, but I saw something of value in the refuse. I stripped a prototype calibration board from a G-marker reader before it was melted down, a complex piece of circuitry I didn't fully understand but knew was important. Now it sat on our small table, a bare green board with a nest of wires I'd painstakingly attached to a salvaged power cell. My plan was to use it to spoof the G-marker signature, to make Maya's blood scream immune to their scanners. Once she was in, I would be granted provisional entry as her guardian. From there, I could use my access to the inside to rig the labor lottery, to pull Ilara and our son Caleb in after us. It was a fragile plan built on a piece of unstable, outdated technology, but it was the only plan I had. Ilara found me when I was trying to solder a loose connection with a heated nail. She stood in the doorway, her face set in the way I knew meant there was no avoiding a confrontation. She wasn't just a survivor. She had been a paramedic in the old world, and she'd seen the Blight take people apart from the inside. "What is that, Liam?" "I didn't try to hide it. It's the way out." She came closer, her eyes tracing the crude wiring. "This is what you've been doing? Sneaking around with this? You'll get us all flagged for summary quarantine." "It's going to work, Ilara. I can get Maya in. Then I can get you and Caleb. She shook her head, a slow, sad motion. You're talking about splitting us up. You're talking about sending our daughter into that place alone. I was there on the first day of the collapse, Liam. I held people's hands while they died in the street because they were alone. We survive together, or we don't survive at all. Her words were an echo of 1,000 arguments we'd had, her belief in community clashing with my desperate pragmatism. I was still trying to find a response when the broadcast started. A loud metallic voice boomed from the speakers mounted on the Aethelgard wall, a sound that always made everyone freeze. The parameter will be finalized in 72 hours. The voice cut off, leaving a ringing silence that was immediately filled by the rising murmur of panic from the Warrens. My long-term plan, my hope of rigging a lottery, it all evaporated in an instant. The future was gone, replaced by a ticking clock. The next day was chaos. People were fighting over scraps, trying to bribe the Warden patrols, or just sitting in the mud, defeated. I cornered Alara as she was packing a small bag with medical supplies for her community clinic. We have to do it now, I said, my voice low and urgent. Maya won't survive this. Her lungs are weak. We can't stay here, not when it becomes a sealed tomb. Alara's face was pale, but her jaw was set. And what about Caleb? What about us? He's stronger. We're stronger. I can get her in, Alara. I can get her in, Alara. I can get her in, Alara. I can save her. Then I'll find a way for us. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of contempt in her eyes. You are asking me to choose between my children, to choose which one I save. No, we live or die together. That was it. There was no convincing her. Her principles were a wall I couldn't breach, and in that moment, I knew I had to act alone. It felt like a betrayal, but the sound of Maya's coughing from the other room was the only argument I could hear. The final 24-hour warning was a continuous, blaring siren. The checkpoint was a churning mass of desperate people pushing against a line of impassive wardens in their clean white and gray uniforms. I had told Maya the sedative in her water was a special medicine to help her sleep through the noise. She was drowsy and compliant in my arms, her head resting on my shoulder. I pushed through the crowd, my heart pounding against my ribs. When my turn came, I held out her arm for the warden. As the needle drew a small vial of blood, I pressed a spoofer against the side of the vial, my thumb on the activation switch. The small board in my palm grew hot, and the power light flickered erratically. For a second, I thought it would fail. The warden slotted the vial into the reader. The machine was silent for a long moment. Then a soft chime sounded, and the screen flashed a brilliant, clean green. SG. Marker. Positive. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees almost buckled. But the relief lasted only a second. Another warden stepped forward and gently but firmly took Maya from my arms. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open in confusion. Papa? I'm right here, sweetie. You're going somewhere safe now. They carried her through the gate, and it slid shut with a heavy, final sound. I had done it. I had saved her. I turned back to go to our hovel, to tell Alara, to start figuring out the next step. But when I got there, the space was empty. The blankets were gone. Caleb's few toys were gone. Alara's medical kit was gone. On the small, crude table where I had built my device, there was a scrap of paper. A note with just 4 words written in Alara's clear, steady hand. You made your choice. The uniform was gray and coarse, and it felt alien against my skin after years of patched-together rags. It was my key, my price of admission as Maya's guardian. They gave me a sanitation assignment in the city's lower service levels, a job no different from the one I had on the outside, cleaning the filth of a system that saw me as disposable. My supervisor was a senior warden named Jorik, a man with a face that looked like it had been carved from tired stone. He ran my ident chip through his terminal on the first day. The system processed my data, a life of water treatment analysis and sanitation boiled down to a few lines of green text. Then a small flag appeared, a footnote from my municipal employment file. Decommissioning crew, Sector 4, scrapping G-marker reader prototypes. I saw his eyes linger on it for a moment too long. He looked up at me, his gaze flat and unreadable, and from that moment on, he was always nearby. If I was scrubbing a floor, he was inspecting a conduit on the far wall. If I was hauling waste containers, he was monitoring a security panel just down the hall. I felt his presence like a weight on my back, the constant, quiet scrutiny of a man who suspected I did not belong. I thought he was looking for a fraud, a desperate father who had cheated his way over the wall. I did not realize then he was looking for a weapon. My first priority was Maya. I found her in the youth habitat, a medical wing so clean the air itself felt polished. The recycled atmosphere carried no grit, no hint of the red dust that defined the world outside. She was sitting up in a small white bed, breathing without a single rasp. Her skin had lost its sallow tint, and color was returning to her cheeks. She smiled when she saw me, a real smile, not the tired grimace she'd managed for years. Seeing her like that, whole and healthy, a wave of certainty washed over me. I had been right. The cost, the lie, breaking our family apart. It was all justified by this single, perfect image of my daughter breathing clean air. The peace lasted until a doctor approached with a datapad. He explained that Maya was in a mandatory 30-day integration quarantine, standard procedure for new alphas from the Warrens. They needed to run a full genome sequence to verify her G-marker status and clear her for entry into the general population. 30 days. My spoofer was a cheap trick, a momentary flicker of false data. It would never hold up against a full sequencing. The paradise I had just entered became a prison with a ticking clock. I fell into a routine, cleaning the pristine corridors of Aethelgard by day and trying to find a way out at night. I watched the city's rhythms, learning its secrets. I saw the heavily armed squads that left through a sealed sublevel every night. The city-wide news network called them Blight Abatement Patrols. But their equipment was not for decontamination. They carried pulse rifles and concussion grenades. One evening, Jorik assigned me to a different route. He had me incinerate medical waste from a high-security genetics lab. Inside a sealed biocontainer, beneath bloody bandages and used syringes, I found a set of child-sized restraints. They were small enough for Maya. Later that same night, the face of Dr. Aris Thorne appeared on every public screen. He was a handsome man in his 50s, with perfectly styled silver hair and a reassuring voice. He spoke of the humane pacification, of the quarantine zones, of containing the tragic victims of the Blight to pave the way for humanity's expansion. The words were smooth and polished, but all I could see were the small leather straps I had just thrown into a furnace. The contradictions were a poison seeping into my thoughts. I was trapped inside a fortress with a new, impossible goal. I had to get Maya out before they discovered she was a lie. Jorik found me trying to access the youth habitat's medical scheduling files from a sanitation hub terminal. My search was clumsy, and it triggered a low-level alert, but it was enough for him. He cornered me in a narrow maintenance tunnel that smelled of ozone and damp concrete, a place far from the city's surveillance network. I thought he was there to arrest me. Instead, he held out a private datapad. He played a video file without a word. It was unedited body cam footage from a warden's helmet. The perspective was jarring, a first-person view of a patrol moving through a ruined street I recognized from the Warrens. They cornered a small group of people against a wall. The faded. They were not the monsters from the propaganda videos. They were thin and ragged, their movements confused, but they were not aggressive. They were cowering. The warden in the video raised his rifle and the squad opened fire, a methodical execution of unarmed, terrified people. Jorik's voice was a low rasp in the quiet tunnel. He told me his wife had been a volunteer for Thorne's original gene therapy trials. She was promised a cure for a rare blood disorder, but the therapy had scrambled her mind, turning her into one of the first fated, He was assigned to the squad that cleared her sector. He had to watch as they exiled her, then later as they pacified her zone. The Crimson Blight was real, but Thorne had used it as a cover to rebrand his failed eugenics program as a cure for the pandemic. Aethelgard was not a sanctuary. It was a laboratory, and the fated with the discarded results. The world I had sold my soul to enter dissolved into ash around me. Getting my family in was never an option. Now I had to get my daughter out. I confronted him the next day, my voice shaking with a rage that felt cold and sharp. I demanded a way out. He did not hesitate. He gave me a data chip, small and gray, containing the complete sewer schematics for Aethelgard. Then he told me about the final pacification of QZ Delta, my old home. Gene-Sys was not just sending in soldiers this time. They had developed a new aerosol chemical agent, one designed to target the specific genetic flaw created by Thorne's failed therapy. It would kill the fated within minutes. He looked at me then, his eyes holding a terrible, empty sorrow. The agent was also lethal to anyone with pre-existing respiratory weakness, the very condition that had plagued Maya her whole life. The reason I had broken my family to get her away from the red dust was now the precise vulnerability that would kill Alara and Caleb. Aethelgard's cure was the poison that would murder my wife and son. My desperation made me reckless. I used my terminal access to research the chemical agent, trying to find information on its dispersal and potential antidotes. My frantic searches must have lit up their security grid like a signal flare. That night, I watched another of Thorne's citywide broadcasts. He was celebrating a successful pacification in another sector, and for a moment he patched in a live feed from the helmet of his head of security, Commander Valerius. The technology was seamless. Thorne could see and speak through his soldiers' eyes. Somewhere deep in the city's security hub, a man named Valerius received an alert about my network breach. He began a methodical triangulation of the source. The system I was fighting was no longer a faceless machine. It had an intelligent hunter, and he was closing in on me. Valerius found me where Jorik and I met to exchange information, a pump station deep in the sewer network. He was not alone. His team moved with a silent efficiency that was terrifying. We were trapped. Jorik looked at me, his face grim with resolve. He shoved the data chip hard into my hand. "For my wife," he said, his voice low. "Go." Then he turned and launched himself at the wardens, a desperate physical attack that created a moment of pure chaos. I scrambled into a narrow drainage pipe as they subdued him. Lockdown alarms began to scream through the tunnels, their sound echoing off the slick concrete walls. As I crawled through the filth, I saw my own face broadcast on a small maintenance screen, my image plastered across the city. Liam Rowe, terrorist. I was trapped in the guts of the machine. My only ally was now their prisoner, and the path to my daughter was gone. I found a small, dry alcove in the sewer system and collapsed, the stench of waste filling my lungs. A public address speaker crackled to life nearby, and Dr. Thorne's calm, reassuring voice filled the darkness. He announced the capture of the traitor, Warden Jorik, and condemned the terrorist who sought to undermine their safety and stability. I was that terrorist. I pulled the data chip from my pocket, its sharp edges digging into my palm. Then I took out the only personal item I had left, a worn photo of my family. All of us together. Alara, Caleb, Maya, me. Standing in the grime of the Warrens, but together. Alara's words from our last argument echoed in my head, a final, damning truth. We survive together, or we don't deserve to survive at all. She was right. I had tried to be clever, to buy my way into a corrupt system, and in doing so, I had endangered everyone I had sworn to protect. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing certainty of my failure. It settled in my chest, and then it hardened into something else. It became a cold, clear rage. My mission was not just to escape, it was to tear down this beautiful, rotten lie. I would save Alara and Caleb from the purge. I would get Maya back, and I would make Thorne's name a curse for what he did to Jorik. I looked at the family in the photograph, a family I had broken. A father protects his family. The truth is the only shelter. I pulled up the schematics on my data slate, the cold light painting my face in the darkness. The tunnels were a web of concrete and steel, a mirror of the pristine city above, and Jorik's data was the key to its every artery. My old life came back to me then, the years spent staring at diagrams of water mains and power grids, understanding how a city breathes. Aethelgard's system was more advanced, but the principles were the same. A single point of failure could cause a cascade. I found it in the schematics. A primary power conduit junction beneath the perimeter wall, separating the city from QZ Delta. It was a thick bundle of cables that fed both the wall's defensive grid and the magnetic lock on the quarantine gate. Overload that junction, and I could create a blackout along the wall, a dead zone in their defenses. It would also force the QZ gate into its emergency default, which was to disengage the lock. It was a one-way path into the heart of the fire. A citywide announcement echoed through the speaker above me, Dr. Thorne's voice smooth and confident as he declared the final pacification of QZ Delta would commence in 6 hours. My timeline was gone. I traced the path on the slate with a dirty finger, a route through effluent channels and maintenance ladders, and started moving. The air grew warmer, and the sound of electricity replaced the steady drip of water. I reached the junction, a steel-cased nexus of cables as thick as my arm. I pried the panel open with a scavenged piece of rebar, exposing the raw wiring within. My hands remembered the work, stripping insulation and rerouting circuits in a way the system was never designed to handle. I created a feedback loop, a direct short that would dump the entire station's power back into itself. I set the overload to trigger on a remote signal from my slate. I had one chance, and it had to be perfect. I climbed the last ladder, pushing open a manhole cover into the perfect manicured grounds of Aethelgard, emerging behind a row of sculpted hedges just as Thorne's weekly address began to play from the city's speakers. His face was on every public screen, a benevolent father speaking to his children. I took a breath of the clean air for the last time and sent the signal. The world went silent for a second. The lights of the city sector before me blinked out, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency lighting. The massive wall to my right went dark, its energy field fizzling into nothing with a shower of sparks. Alarms started to blare across the city, a chorus of panicked machines. Thorne's address cut off, replaced by his voice directing security units to the breach, his tone sharp and angry now. I ran through the engineered darkness, past confused wardens who were trying to make sense of the chaos. The QZ Delta gate was 100 yards ahead, a massive slab of steel set into the wall. Its magnetic lock was dead, and the gate stood partially ajar, a dark slice of freedom and death. Headlights cut through the darkness as armored vehicles converged on my position. Commander Valerius and his extermination squad. I slipped through the gap in the gate, just as their boots hit the pavement behind me. The air on this side was different, heavy with the smell of decay and the fine red dust that coated everything. I was back home, inside the kill zone. I moved through the silent, ruined streets, calling their names. I found them in the basement of an old municipal building, a small group of survivors huddled around a single battery-powered lantern. Ilara looked up, her face etched with exhaustion, a rifle held loosely in her hands. Caleb was beside her, his small face pale with fear. He saw me and his eyes hardened. "You left us." "I came back," I said, my voice rough. I looked from my son to my wife, seeing the questions and the betrayal in her eyes, but there was no time. The sound of the squad's methodical advance echoed down the street. We had to move. Ilara nodded once, a sharp, practical gesture. She was the leader here. She pointed to a map of the sector they had drawn on the concrete floor, showing me their routes and defensive positions. Her people were organized. They had survived this long on her strength. Now, I had brought the end of their world down on top of them. The extermination squad entered the QZ under floodlights, their orders clear over their open comms. Sanitize the zone. No witnesses. We fell back, using the ruins as cover. Ilara directed her people, her voice a low command, and I followed, my desperate energy now focused by her calm. We led them on a chase through the skeletal remains of the city, separating them, picking them off one by one in the shadows. We passed a small group of the fated huddled in an alley, their eyes wide with confusion at the noise and lights. Ilara's people formed a line between them and the advancing wardens, shielding them, pushing them deeper into the safety of the ruins. The survivors were protecting the victims, a truth that Aethelgard had buried under a mountain of lies. I ended up in the city library, a place where books rotted on the shelves in the damp air. Valerius found me there. He was a black silhouette of armor and weapons against the harsh light from the QZ gate. He raised his rifle, but I was already moving, tipping over a massive shelf of books that crashed between us. He was stronger and better armed, a professional killer. I was a technician who knew how systems worked. His helmet was a piece of Gene-Sys tech, and I had seen its broadcast function on the news feeds. I could see the small control panel on its side, the access port I used to wipe clean on the mobile testing units. We fought through the maze of fallen shelves, a brutal, clumsy battle. He pinned me against a wall, his grip like iron, and I drove my thumb hard into the helmet's control panel, smashing the delicate circuits beneath the plastic. It sparked, the internal display flickering across his visor. At that exact moment, a voice came through his external speaker, a voice that was supposed to be on a private channel, cold and impatient. "Commander, your hesitation is unacceptable. Liquidate all subjects and witnesses. The board requires a clean slate." Dr. Thorne's voice did not just play through Valerius's helmet. The system short I created had rerouted the signal, pushing the audio feed from the private command channel to the citywide emergency address network that was still open. His genocidal order was broadcast across all of Aethelgard. The QZ Delta gate stood open. Inside Aethelgard, the screens showed Thorne's frozen, shocked face as stunned alphas and wardens stood in the sudden silence, their weapons lowering as the foundation of their world cracked beneath their feet. Outside, I stood with Ilara and Caleb, my arm around my son's shoulder. We were not looking back at the beautiful lie as it began to collapse. We were looking forward, at the huddled group of fated we had saved, and the tired faces of the other survivors. The war for what came next had just begun. But I was facing it with my entire family, ready to build something real on the hard ground of the truth.